All right, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, Mr. Dixon, this is fascinating. Can we continue our discussion about monopolies? But of course, let's continue our discussion of monopolies. All right, so we went through the attributes already. Now I want to expand a little bit about some of the attributes and talk a little bit more about monopolies and monopoly market structure, okay? The first thing that probably needs to be said, and we'll just get this right out in the open, is a monopoly market structure in the U.S. is actually illegal, right? It's kind of an odd dynamic because when you start out, you start a new business, in your garage. The government is right there to help you. They've got the Small Business Administration, and they've got all these different resources and things to help you grow your business because, of course, small business is the backbone of the economy. But if your business is too successful and you start gobbling up all the competition and buying out your competition or driving them out of business, and then you wake up one day and you're the only one left, now the government's not so much your friend. All right, beginning more than 100 years ago, but by the late 19th century, so late 1800s, with the Industrial Revolution in full swing, the the economy found itself sort of dominated by very few firms and sort of monopoly structures. Pick an industry: gas, oil, steel, finance, railroad. Were being dominated by these companies, and so in the 1890, let's see, there's a couple of different things, but the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 is what outlawed monopolies in the U.S. And so the reality is monopolies or a monopoly market structure is illegal in the U.S. except if the government says it's okay. All right, so there are certain times when the government will come along and say, it's okay. So one example is a natural monopoly. So in the case of a natural monopoly is if either you own a key resource or if society is best served by a single entity managing a key resource, then the government will allow for a natural monopoly to occur. A good example are utilities, right? If you think about, say, like a river or a lake system, you wouldn't want multiple firms building dams and damming up the river at different places and trying to compete to offer electrical utilities. So in that case, it makes sense to have a single company sort of to own and operate that. And in some cases, not in some, I mean in virtually all cases where there is a natural monopoly that's allowed to function, the government does regulate that monopoly and influence both the price and quantity, mostly price, that the monopoly charges. Okay, sometimes the government will issue patents and licenses, and copyrights and things like that. Again, to allow a monopoly to flourish. In rare cases, government will take over a monopoly and actually operate the monopoly. That's happened a couple of times over the years where either monopoly was about to go out of business through poor management or something like that, or was about to go out of business because of government intervention or laws or whatever. But there are small examples or a few examples of the government actually taking over the monopoly and running it. But that's not super common. What is common though are patents, is the issuing of patents and licenses, and in fact these become really good examples of barriers. Okay, so we talked about what a barrier is, right? A barrier is something that prevents firms from joining into a market. And I have a really good example of how this works, okay? And it has to do with pharmaceutical. So the pharmaceutical industry is a really good example of when the government allows a monopoly to occur. So if you think of a company like Pfizer or some of these big pharmaceuticals that spend years and years and years on research and development, okay, in order to be able to recoup that research and development and earn a profit and maximize a profit, what the government does is will issue a patent, meaning that only that company is allowed to offer a certain drug. And the patents always have a time component, so there's an expiration date associated with patents. But it usually lasts decades, and the pharmaceutical firm, is allowed to operate as a monopoly, as the sole provider of a unique drug for a certain amount of time. Again, to enjoy the economic benefit of that. As soon as the patent is expired, okay, and there's no longer a barrier preventing other firms from entering, that's when you get other firms that then jump in and by that point have sort of reversed engineered the workings of the drug and then offered generics. That's where generics come from, right? A generic drug is simply a drug that no longer has a patent that applies to it and is allowed to be produced by other firms and other pharmaceutical companies. And that's a really good example of everything we're talking about right now. Yeah. All right. Now, with that, let's talk a little bit about. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Mr. Dixon, this is fascinating. Could you draw me a picture of a monopoly? Yeah, I can. All right. So let me take my handy dandy eraser here and get rid of this. Now, the good news is the cost structure, short-run cost structure. Whoa, breaking the chair. Short-run cost structure looks exactly like it did in the previous market structure for a perfectly competitive market structure. Okay, so if I draw a picture of cost, right, I have average total cost, average variable cost, marginal cost. So there's my cost structure. Now, as you'll recall, in a perfectly competitive market structure, because the firm had to take the market price, among other things, the demand curve is perfectly horizontal, okay? But I'm going to tell you something. For a monopoly, and also for the remaining market structures, because the firm can set its own price, the demand curve looks like a normal demand curve, okay? And what does marginal revenue look like in this case? Okay, well, let's do a quick little, I'm going to put up a quick little schedule here. So we have some quantity, and we'll just say 0, 1, 2, 3, and we have some price. So the price starts at 10, then we'll go 9, 8, 7. Okay? So if I calculate my total revenue, right, it's just 10 times 0 is 0, 9 times 1 is 9, 8 times 2 is 16, 21. You with me? Now, marginal revenue is the difference. So 9 minus 0, the marginal revenue of that first quantity of whatever it is we're looking at here is 9, okay? So the price and the marginal revenue are the same. But look what happens to the marginal revenue of the second unit, right? So 7. So the price of the second unit, the marginal revenue is slightly below that price. What about the marginal revenue of the third unit? 5. Again, marginal revenue is below the price. Now, since the price comes off of the demand curve, the way you would draw this then is that the marginal revenue, the curve, is always going to be below the demand curve because marginal revenue is going to be below the price. And that's what I was talking about here. So What I mean by marginal revenue less than price is basically this right here. Marginal revenue curve is going to be below the demand curve because in all cases, and another way of understanding this is how's a monopoly sell more quantity of something, right? I mean, really the only choice they have is to lower the price to sell a greater quantity. And so, anyway, that's what it looks like, okay? Now, if that doesn't make sense, then go back and replay the video and then reread the chapter. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this right here because this is what we're interested in. This is a picture of a monopoly firm, okay? And the same rules apply in terms of the checklist on how I want you to look at this and understand this, okay? So what's happening with this monopoly, right? In other words, which one of the four conditions? Is there economic profit being earned here? Is it zero economic profit? Is it economic loss, or is it shutdown? Okay, so here's how you're going to do it, right? So step one, X marks the spot. Well, where does X mark the spot? What spot tells us where, or tells firms actually, where to maximize profit? It's your marginal cost equals your marginal revenue. Marginal cost, marginal revenue. Step one is put a circle right there. Okay. Step two is to either draw or highlight the magic line that runs through that point. Okay, and that point is going to have some quantity associated with it. And take a look at that quantity because that's the quantity that's being transacted in this market. Remember, what's it take to have a market? Buyer, seller, they have to agree upon what? Price and quantity, and that's the quantity they've agreed upon. Okay? All right, step three is to calculate revenue. And you do that by getting your price. And remember what I just said a few minutes ago, earlier in this video. Price comes off the demand curve. Demand is the ability, the willingness and ability of buyers to purchase goods and services. So the price, the agreed upon price, is going to come off of the demand curve. So where does this magic line intersect the demand curve? And it intersects it right here. Okay, so you calculate, in this case, it's going to be 10 times 10 is 100, right? 10 times 10, which is really just the area of that big rectangle, right? 4, I can count, is calculate cost. And you're going to take where that magic line intersects the average total cost curve. So in this case, it's right here, right? And take that times the quantity. So in this case, it's going to be 8 times 10, 80. 5 is just revenue minus cost. So in this case, it's going to be revenue 100 minus cost of 80, 20. And then 6 is what's the condition, right? So what is it? Is it economic profit? Is it zero economic profit? Is it loss? Is it shutdown? Whatever. And here's the way to understand it. If this number right here, after you're done calculating, is positive, then it's a positive economic profit. And in this case, you can see this big rectangle right here is our revenue. The smaller one right here is our cost. And what's left over right here is our profit, right? And we can do the math, right? 10 minus 8 is 2, times 10 is 20. So we have positive economic profit. If this were, 100 minus 100 and it came to 0, then it would be 0 economic profit. If you did revenue minus cost and you came out with a negative number, that's going to be economic loss, so long as it's above the bottom of the average variable cost curve here, okay? And then the fourth one is if it's equal to or less, if the price is equal to or less than the bottom of the average variable cost curve, it's time to shut down, okay? So, again, that's what a monopoly looks like. Slightly different demand curve and marginal revenue curve, but same cost curves. But most importantly, it's the same way to sort of understand or prosecute that same checklist used to calculate revenue and cost. Okay, so again, I just want to make sure that we're clear here. So this whole big rectangle right here is your revenue. right? This smaller rectangle right here is your cost. Once you subtract cost from revenue, what's left over up here is profit. Okay? And then to really get down to the nitty gritty, that total cost, we know that total cost in the short run can be divided into variable cost and fixed costs. And we know that the fixed cost is the area between those two, the average total cost curve and the average variable cost curve. So this would be your fixed cost component, and this would be your variable cost, and those two added together are total cost. Okay? All right. I'm going to stop, let you think about that for a little bit, rewatch it if you need to, and then we'll pick it up in the next video.